Good morning, friends. How are you today? So glad that you are with us and coming along. Hope that you are grand today. There is a goodness in your soul that. I'm curious today. How goes it with your soul? It's a great old question that spiritual directors once asked me, and it's such a. It's. I think it frames our world so well these days. How is it with your soul? Good morning, John. Great to see you, Yvette. Good morning. Good morning, Irene. So glad you're here. I hope you are keeping well in these days, and that there is goodness for you. That we continue to gather and continue our journeying. It's the gift to do so. It is truly a gift to be able to gather, even in these meager ways. Um, I continue, as I say, to take encouragement from your little digital faces over there. And good morning, Bonnie. Great to see you here. Hope you're well. Jamie, hello, hello. Linda, great to see you. Hope you're well. Good morning, Bob Guinan. Hope you're doing all right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So glad you're here with us. I hope that your day is going well and that this morning has brought you grace. That there's some goodness in your journeying these days and in your life. Hope things are great. So, how how are you? How are you this morning? Just curious. Hope you're doing all right. Um, Let me know in the chat if you're there. So, uh, we'll give it. I see a few more folks coming along, so we'll let them hop in here before we get going. But I just want to continue to offer you encouragement these days. MRI tomorrow, says Jamie. Very good. All right. We will hope for good things. Good morning, Fannie Faye Davis. Hope that what you find, Jamie, what they find is able to bring healing and comfort for sure. Good morning, everybody. I love a project, and that's keeping me sane. Good, good. We should. Yes, we all need to put our hands to work and put our hearts to work these days. That is for sure. There is um, there is a real powerlessness in all this as we kind of watch the world churn and spin, and the reminder that even in the midst of our projects right here, the things that we have to do in our lives, and not just kind of folding our socks, but in the holding of others, we have power beyond measure, and in our living and in our being. So continue to open to that. That sounds great. Good morning, Roselia. Hope you are well. So good morning, everybody. All right, let's get going. It is the 15th day. It is the middle of January, friends. It is the 15th day of January uh, on Thursday at 11:11. And I am so glad that each one of you are here because we are going to talk about. Good morning, Donna. Glad you're here. We're going to talk this morning about Martin Luther King Jr. his and a little bit of his legacy and his invitation. So because it in this next Monday is coming up Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so I thought that was appropriate. And I thought this week we're kind of talking about some of the people that I have found that have spoken to me in these days. And so, Monday we talked about kind of Helen Keller's, the beauty of some of her journey. And yesterday we talked about John H. Noble. And so today I want to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. But I want to begin, and there's so many things you could talk about, and there's so many different places I could go, but I still find so much power in his letter from a Birmingham jail. So just to set this up, so first you got to kind of remember who Martin Luther King Jr. is. He is I would say one of the greater prophets of the Christian tradition in the last century. He led the civil rights movement. He was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He led it out. He led it the nonviolent resistance to Jim Crowism and to segregation in the South, the inability for people to simply participate in life. And he led that movement. And one of the more famous pinnacles of that is his letter from a Birmingham jail. And I think it's powerful because we have to remember how this all gets set up, and what he's hearkening back to, where he writes. Because yesterday we talked about John H. Noble and how what he found in prison, in the depths of the gulags of the Soviet Union. And today we talk about another prisoner, and in some ways even Tuesday was talking about having Helen Keller and the prison of her own capabilities and what she found there. And so that we discover, I think, more often is not when we are on the pinnacle experiences of achievement or gloriousness or comfort or goodness in our lives, or even when we're hitting all cylinders and doing it right. But it is these prison moments that we encounter in our lives. And I think if we look at our world right now and all that we're encountering, I would submit to you that you and I are in the midst of a bit of the prison moment. I mean, we can talk about the restrictions that the state has placed upon us and how we've chosen to separate ourselves from others, and for some of you that may be more than others, but even more the way that the chaos of our days seem to be playing out. All of that seems to bring us into this prison of powerlessness. I mean, this is what prison is, right? It's this powerlessness. It's this inability, like I can't get up and leave the room because there are bars. I am stuck in where I am. And I think that we have bars of our own choosing and bars of our own making and bars that have been foisted upon us in this age right now. And so I think there's a part of me that is linking to these prisoners. But Martin Luther King Jr. finds himself in prison in Birmingham. So he goes to Birmingham, which is one of the key and core places of probably he calls it the most segregated city in America. And he goes there by the invitation of the wider Southern Christian League, that they go down, but everybody thought this was a bad idea because they believed things were getting better. Like, it's getting better. Why don't you just let Bull Connor who had run for mayor and lost. So he was police chief, but he didn't become mayor, and everybody thought he was going to become mayor. And so there was this moving reaction even within Birmingham that everybody thought it was getting better. And so here he is, and he goes down and sponsors a 1,000-person march through the middle of Birmingham. A march that remains and stays nonviolent, but as you can imagine, 1,000 people walking down the street does not go unnoticed, and it is not without disruption in the as Martin Luther King would call it, that it was important to be a gadfly. This is how he saw his movement, as a gadflies in the world, so that people might not get too comfortable in the oppression that they existed in. I loved that image, that there is something about our gadflyness that we all owe and need to hold on to in these days. But he writes this, as a response. So he's arrested immediately after this march, and he writes it as a response, the letter from the Birmingham jail, as a response to a bunch of other clergymen who say, you shouldn't have done this. This is too radical. Yes, we understand that you didn't call for violence, and there was no violence on behalf of the marchers anyway. Yet, what he finds is that they say, things were getting better. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have pushed this any further, because it was getting better anyway. And from the jail cell of Birmingham, he writes on a longhand pad, he writes out this letter from the accusations that had been made to him. And, we shouldn't be surprised that it's genius. Martin Luther King Jr. was a genius. He graduated from high school at 15. He goes to Morehead College. He ends up graduating from Morehead. By the time he's 23, 24, he has his PhD in systematic theology from Boston University, probably one of the premier systematic theology faculties in the country. He is the smartest of the lot. And so we probably shouldn't be surprised that the letter from the Birmingham jail brings with it all that we can imagine in its eloquence. But where does he start? And this is where I want to bring us today, is that he says these words. He says, beyond this, I'm in Birmingham. Remember, he was answering these charges from these other clergy. He says, beyond this, I'm in Birmingham because there's injustice here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city in the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonians' call for aid. Oh, so good. Now, Paul writes 4 letters from prison. Paul writes four of the great letters that we know to be the epistles of Paul were written from prison. One of my very favorites of his letter to the church in Philippi, and he was a favorite in Philippi, and they were a favorite to him. That actually, when he's in prison in Rome, they take the church in Philippi sends a person. I mean, think about this: Macedonia today, Greece, edges of Greece near Turkey, sends them to Rome, gives them with a bag full of cash to go and minister and help Paul in jail. This was the relationship that the church in Philippi had with Paul. They believed in him, and he believed in them. And so there is this love affair between this church and him, and so they would go. They sent their missionary to him to care for him while he's in prison in Rome, and he would send back this letter. So with the letter that we have, the church, the letter from the epistle to the church in Philippi, what we call the book of Philippians. it is this letter that comes as a result of them love of this church that he founded, that he brought into relationship with Jesus with. They now reached out and ministered to him. That he's called to the Macedonian people came back in love and grace to him. And I think these words, that he starts out his letter this way. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me is actually served to advance the gospel. That me being in jail hasn't been a bad thing. As a result, it has come clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter will do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former will preach it out of selfish ambition and not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that every way, whether false or true motives, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for what I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. What has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. Martin Luther King Jr. in jail calls on that spirit of Paul in jail, being ministered to by his little church out there. And Martin Luther King Jr. lifts up this letter to them. And so he responds to the accusations of the world. He responds to the brokenness of the world, not with violence, not with hate, not with not with vile, even though, one of the very interesting things about the civil rights movement is that little thing that Paul talks about in jail 2,000 years earlier, is that some are preaching for their own glory and to create trouble for me while I'm in jail, and some are preaching for out of a true love of Christ. Well, as much as we look at the history of the civil rights movement, that was true then too. There were, as much as there were people truly involved in the movement to bring about the freedom of all peoples, so too there were all sorts of competing motives in there. And yet Paul in graciousness could say, what does it matter as long as Christ is being praised? And King would say this as well. He says, we've got a lot of people we have to work with, and what does it matter why they're here if we get about our Father's work? One of my favorite lines from this whole letter, that of him being imprisoned, and it's not the most famous of lines, I don't think, but it is this. It is this, and I think it's this that Paul's hearkening to from his prison letter. And so these are Martin Luther King Jr.'s words. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? I think, friends, we find ourselves in these days in a very similar place and in a very real and true way. And I think we hearken back to those great words of C.S. Lewis, who when talking about the Christian faith says, and makes this the incredible and powerful point that either Christianity is everything or Christianity is nothing. But what Christianity can't be is mildly important. What it can't be is a second thought in our day. Either God came into the world as person to forge a relationship with us, not just with us whole, but with you personally, with me personally, came into the world, suffered all that it had to endure, linked us back up with the divine, and brought us to the very footsteps and very table that he has set a place for us. Either that is true, and that in the midst of this we will live forever, or it is all shenanigans and trickery and a big game of three-card Monte. That either, but it can't be. But what it can't be is mildly true. This is Lewis's proposition, and he's so right. And I think what we look at when we look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, and when we look at his ministry, and we look at his prophetic role in the realm of America, and how he challenges every power and authority structure in the world, what we find is this same sentiment that I think, and Len Sweet makes this claim as well, that one of the greatest tricks that was done on Christianity in the 20th century, largely, was that it became a nice moderate religion. And it became this nice thing to do on Sunday mornings when you maybe didn't have anything else to do, and that in that we were able to kind of have some friends and maybe have a nice story in the morning, and that all in the midst of this, that it became somehow a defanged tradition. And the great invitation and the great reality is that we take in these days an extremist position. We are extremists for love. We are extremists for faith. We are extremists for justice. We are extremists that the good will win in this world and that the good will come in this world. We hold that an extreme position, that there is no way and place and life that you can escape the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. There is no way and shape or form or kind of Saturday night behavior that is going to get you out of the one who came into this world to love you. That we try so hard to get ourselves out of our extremist position. I think it's one of the greatest tricks we try is just to waddle along for another day so that we need not take a position. And I think one of the things of 2021 that has come to us is that it is time that we be extremists for love. It is time that we be extremists for grace. It was just time that we be extremists for healing. And again, in the grand tradition of King and all those who came before him and Paul, this comes not with violence, but it comes with love and faith and joy and healing for a world that so desperately needs it. That's where we find ourselves, friends. He continues on in the letter to say, we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of people willing to be co-workers with God. Without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally to the forces of social stagnation. We are co-workers with God. And all of that great systematic theology that he learned in BU, that at the very pinnacle of theological debate and ability, what being the wonderkind and smartest guy in the room in every room that he went in, what he had to offer us from a jail cell on a pad with a stubby pencil, he offers us this reality that we are co-workers with God. And that puts us, friends, in an extreme position. It puts us in a position where we are, whether we must or not, we are at the very edge of aligning ourselves with the forces of greatness, with aligning ourselves with the forces of every sunrise, aligning ourselves with the forces of every blade of grass that would push through a sidewalk, aligning ourselves with the forces of grace and love that has saved every soul from pain and hurt, whether we knew it or not. As we look towards MLK and these days, as we look towards his journey and look towards his, I think in many ways his example. Again, not a perfect guy, but it's not about perfection. It is about this walking and living and journeying that he brought forward, just as Paul brought forward 2,000 years prior to him, that this, not in violence, not in hatred, not in hurt, not in malice, but in love and in grace and in wisdom and in truth and in courage and in temperance, in all of these, that we might find the Mr. Connors of the world defeated, and that we might open ourselves to the grand and glorious good of a world that might be gadflied into moving just a little further than it is right now. As Paul would speak to the guards about and witness to them through his imprisonment, as MLK would show us the possibilities of a better world than the one that we had at that time, so too do we come to step into this world in love and grace and truth and live out a life called by Christ Jesus, called in ministry. Paul ends that section with this, and I'll end it with us today. For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in this body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me. It's easy to check out of this life. It's easy to take that via media. But to step into the extremis of our days, to step into the extremis of our lives, to be truly the co-creators of God we are called to be, to hear the call of the prisoner that we might be or that we might know, and to step into living in all of its difficulty and all of its pain, that we might once again Hear the boasting in Christ Jesus, and that will abound on account of our work. All right, friends, that's my hope for you today, is that this little journey has brought us to the end of this week, and so I hope you will have a great weekend. We are in worship. We're working through this journey of the virtues. So we are in this series of the vital virtues, and we're on to the second of the cardinal virtues on Sunday, which is this virtue of temperance. You don't often hear a temperance sermon these days, so if you're interested, we'll be there at 10 o'clock, and we'll be back with another 11:11. I want to invite you. I don't often do this, but please like and share the page. If there's a part of this that spoke to you, whether it's today or maybe it's maybe it's one of the past ones that you've heard, please like and share it. We are always seeking to offer this ministry to a wider folks. And if there's somebody on your heart that you think could benefit from these messages, I encourage you to like and share them. All right, friends, thank you. Have a great Thursday, and we will pick up 11:11 again next week. Peace and grace, friends.